In today's story, the wife found her husband's covert liaison with her mom, and this startling reality resulted in a tragedy. Alice Harris constantly thought about murder. Her life is nearly ideal, if not perfect. She resided in a suburban region at the age of 35. Austin, Texas, resides in a large home with a white picket fence and a well-kept garden. Adrian Harris, his spouse, was a prosperous lawyer for a big law firm, focusing on business affairs. He worked diligently and frequently stayed late at the office, yet he consistently came home with he was grinning and eager to spend time with Elliot. Their son was with their kids. Molly, their daughter, was 8 years old. Alice had just 5 children. Her biggest delight while working as an elementary school teacher at school and enjoyed dedicated her leisure time to raise Alice and back in college, Adrian had met at the while she was a pupil in the School of Department, want to work as an instructor and assisting kids in achieving. In contrast, Adrian's academic was always a bright legal student, assured and motivated in their partnership evolved swiftly, and within a year following, they met, got married, and started a family, appeared to adhere to a meticulously planned route to a prosperous marriage and career kids, and a house in a nice. Alice felt proud of her in the neighborhood. Marriage, she thought she and Adrian has overcome a lot of obstacles. Together, conquer all obstacles. And naturally, there were ways to preserve their love. Times when she believed their union was in danger, but each time they managed to address their problems, regardless of whether it was the children's work-related stress ailments or monetary issues, they constantly supported one another. For Alice, Adrian was more than simply her spouse. Their house was their best buddy and partners, full of pleasure and happiness they would play family games in the evenings, watch films together, and on the weekends, they frequently went to the park for picnics or traveled to Lake Travis, where a little yacht was owned by them. Family happy times appeared so natural that Alice never thought of anything might go wrong. But slowly, Alice started observing Adrian's changes. He began with little things at first, more frequently staying late at work, and he ceased recommending walks in the evening or meals. More often than his emotions started to change, seeming more aloof. Alice, absorbed in his thoughts, ascribed due to the stress of his job. Adrian was leading in complicated instances, and she recognized that his work took a lot of the time and effort she made to assist him by establishing a comfortable and warm ambiance at his house where he could unwind after a tough work day. But over time, Adrian's concerns only increased, grew much further distant from her, would occasionally take a weekend vacation. However, claiming that they are business travels, they used to spend weekends together. Together, Alice eventually noticed that his level of secrecy has increased with he used to leave his phone running, without giving it much consideration, but he now frequently avoided her view of it. Alice sensed that something wasn't quite right, but she was hesitant to pose straightforward inquiries. Her intuition informed her that she must to learn more about what was happening. But another aspect of her was terrified of what she could find out. That she attempted to speak with Adrian is meticulously inquiring about his job and his disposition. But every time he told her that everything would be well, that she was overly concerned and that his fatigue would only last for a little while, ease her fears, but only temporarily, because in these moments, Alice resorted more and more to her mother. CLA had relocated to Austin a few years prior for advice, to be nearer to the family years ago, and frequently went to see them for Alice. But she wasn't only a mother, but they are genuine friends. May discuss life share for hours on end. Their worries and talk about family. CLA had consistently been a source of knowledge and assistance for Alice, and she trusted her with her most private information. Alice continued to hope that these were only short-term issues and that they would be defeated by their family. She wanted to avoid assuming the worst. maintaining optimism following. They all led fantastic lives, kids and years of sharing. Joy, how could it all go wrong? Alice was plagued by these ideas as she attempted to preserve the look of normally. She carried on with her everyday duties, including the children's care, and she made an effort to keep the house tidy, divert her attention from negative ideas, persuading herself that everything would improve. But in her heart, she thought there would be significant changes on. Alice was unaware that her horizon every day morning in their comfortable house would become a nightmare in real life. Started when she unintentionally spotted Adrian left her phone in the kitchen table that he had departed early for work. Early in the morning, and the home was covered with a quiet stillness because the kids weren't home. Their grandma had been their host. Alice had intended to spend the weekend with. She took some time to pamper herself. While making coffee, looking out the window, when she seen her at their green yard, the screen of my husband's phone illuminates with an. Alice wasn't the kind to receive incoming messages, to surveil her spouse, but somehow she had to concentrate on the TV at that moment. As she approached, she noticed that her mother sent the message, but only the sentence's beginning was apparent. Those phrases, "can't wait to see you again," took her by surprise. She had no explanation to suspect her spouse or mother, but why was she there? The message looked odd. Adrian's mother saying similar things, anxiety and curiosity took over. When she answered the phone, she didn't have. She and Adrian hesitated before opening it, had never concealed their passwords from one another. Thus, the phone was within easy reach when Alice froze when she started the talk. Adrian and her mother Claire are in position, have been messaging one other for some months. These weren't only family or friends. Each line was loaded with relevant conversations, concealed desire and private times that Alice never imagined her mom and husbands might exchange information about. There were several clues concerning secrets in the messages, encounters with covert embraces, and provocative remarks they made about how well they were keeping their connection a secret, thus so nothing would raise suspicions. In her mother recently penned a note, "You're so careful that nobody will ever find out." Alice thought that it would remain just between them. She sat amid the anguish, her heart clenching. Kitchen as though the floor was tears seeping out from beneath her feet, filled her eyes. Yet she was unable to let herself cry, but not just yet. Need to compile all the information to recognize the extent of this treachery. She kept browsing the texts, revealing an increasing amount of each message seemed like a jab to the details. It seemed to the heart that every fresh words tore her mother and herself apart. The spouse had been coming up with reasons to meet. They were lying to her behind her back, not only regarding themselves, but also regarding their kids. There were references to how they acted fake at family gatherings, pretending that everything was all right. Alice couldn't comprehend that this was taking place in her life, had been gone just a few hours. All this time, she managed to locate the phone, sat there, overcome with sadness and shock. Attempting to choose her next course of action, Mother was the only person she ever had. She believed that her spouse had deceived her. Man with whom she had lived together and reared her kids with had ended up. She realized she couldn't simply lie, give this up. However, what should she do right now? Alice wasn't prepared for conflict. Although she felt deceived, she hadn't yet knowing how to behave. Therefore, she chose to stay, be composed, and refrain from acting hastily at first. She needed to learn more. This phone, she realized, would now be. Her mind was racing, but she had the secret. Providing ideas for the next step and a A-plan was beginning to take shape in her heart. In the days that followed, Alice made an effort to pretend like everything is normal, grinned at Adrian, and spoke about plans for the future. with him acting as though everything was just as it had been, but in there wasn't a single instance of peace each evening. She would examine his phone while he slept, accumulating more and further proof of their affair. Despite everything, her heart was being ripped apart at the moment, but she also started to avoid the agony and rage. Seeing her mother out of fear that she would be incapable of preventing herself from blurting forth all that had developed within her. However, she also believed that CLA believed her kid had discovered something about this, made things more tense in their partnership, and Alice began preparing her approach to confronting them. Considering the facts, on July 14, 2023, the Harris home was surrounded by intense. Alice was unable to find calm on that day, or each time she glanced at Adrian at night. A flood of hurt and treachery swept across. She was no longer able to conceal herself feelings, but made an effort to keep an look of normalcy in order to the kids. As Adrian realized something had shifted between them and started behaving, he saw with suspicion that Alice had grown aloof and chilly, yet he paused. Perhaps he intended to inquire what was wrong, hoping everything would settle down on their own, or perhaps he simply didn't wish to elevate the issue, no matter how deeply he was aware that things had already gotten out of hand, because it was impossible to conceal the truth because much longer that night, everything, the kids' behavior appeared normal. Alice was having dinner in the living room. Adrian is in the kitchen cooking supper. Read the news on his phone while seated at the table. Tablet, however, below this surface of emotions of normalcy, were bubbling and ready to explode. The atmosphere was heavy with a feeling of a looming disaster. When the kids went to bed, there was a pause. Alice, feeling suffocated, looked at Adrian. Feeling once more that she was unable to endure this act throughout the day, she had been plagued by memories of how they had. At this stage where her spouse and her mother, the two individuals closest to her, this was the time when life had become treacherous. She was being torn apart by thinking, couldn't continue to remain silent. Therefore, she tried to be cool as he approached him. Even if she was seething within, we must. She spoke in a forceful yet strained tone. Glancing up from his tablet, Adrian, with a wary look on his face, he felt that something wasn't right, but was unable to fully understand what he feigned not to comprehend, in the hopes of steer clear of the discussion. On what precisely want to discuss? He asked. Alice was attempting to hide his nervousness. Her eyes froze, filled with grief and rage, desired to release everything simultaneously, to yell at him to level charges, but rather, she remained silent, certain that yelling wouldn't help because I am well informed. Adrian's voice was steady yet subdued. Understand those remarks concerning you and my mother? Hovered like a thunderclap in the air. Adrian's hands became pale at once, shuddering as the drug fell out of his. The faint thud of fingertips landing on the table, he didn't know what to say. Panic arose within of him that he hadn't anticipated Alice will at least not discover the truth. Alice, he's not what you believe he is. Started looking for a reason, but Alice, raised her, even though she knew it was useless. Stopping him with your hand, don't I see all of your messages were lies to me. After Bet deceived our family, I now desire to understand how her voice quiver. But she made an effort to be resilient. Adrian dropped his head, failing to locate the words he recognized that whatever answer would only worsen the situation. His head was filled with ideas from he knew she was guilty and feared for his life, was enraged and only knew what she may do so next. However, rather than carrying on the argument, Alice just turned and went to the door. Tension caused her body to shake, and she was aware that if she remained there, further she may lose control in a minute. Went outside and breathed in the refreshing night air in an attempt to soothe her broken psyche. Standing in the shadows, She listened to the nighttime noises, attempting to gather her thoughts. Yet inside the home, a pivotal moment was taking place. Panic-stricken Adrian concluded he had nothing remained to cause him to lose his sanity. By desperation and terror started producing the worst-case situations. He believed that maybe if Alice went farther, she might tell everyone to ruin his life. Profession? He got up from his seat and looked. Suddenly, abruptly, he had conflicting fury. With desperate pictures of a potential future humiliation flashed into his head. The devastation of his reputation loss, of all he had ever constructed. This dread became anger that he was unable to control. Can no longer afford to let go of the Alice was unaware of the situation until the door behind her opened softly and Adrian materialized next to her like a shadow. He came up behind and ahead of her. Adrian, she could say or do anything, abruptly caught her by the throat. His hand smothered the cry as he tightened his grip on his fingers. Alice made a valiant attempt to break away. Her hands were desperately clutching at his, but his strength caused her body to flail in a frantic effort to take a breath. But every second that goes by, her eyes widened in terror as she ebbed away. She became aware that her own spouse was the guy she loved was attempting to murder her. It was still and dark at night, and nobody just listened to the noises of their struggle. The moon served as a silent observer of the horrific spectacle, taking place in the house's shadows, when everything was Adrian was standing above Alice's corpse. His hands were shaking, and he was breathing heavily. Examined his thoughts and her dead face, realized what he had done at last. This wasn't a nightmare or a dream. This was his entire reality, gripped there with remorse and anguish. In the morning, there was no going back. On July 15, 2023, as the initial glimpses of the sunlight started to shine through the trees, police vehicles pulled up on the Silent A neighbor in Austin, owned a suburban saw that there was a problem at the Harris's home, and dialed the police. Jessica Miller is an experienced detective. Investigator with several years of expertise was the initial person to reach the site. When the police arrived at the residence, Adrian Harris met them, and he looked. His eyes were red and unkempt, as though he hadn't stood on the porch and slept the entire night. Despite his shaking hands, he was attempting to keep things under control, Detective Miller inquired, examining Adrian closely. She saw his uneasiness closely, yet didn't leap to my wife's soft voice, conveyed his conclusions. I discovered her in the backyard, unsteady. The words, "she's dead," emerged out of thin air, and Adrian, who was dead, dropped his head as though detective, attempting to conceal his feelings. Miller understood right away that something was off, but she chose not to hurry. Used to working in a systematic manner, assembling information piece by piece, prior to swiftly rendering any decisions, the police surrounded the area with forensic. The crime scene was examined by professionals. The remains of Alice Harris was found on the lawn in the backyard, showed obvious signs of her neck was strangled. Causing the it was evident at first that she had been carefully strangled. Detective Miller examined the situation and the body there. There were no indications of conflict in the area, which prompted her to wonder whether Alice had been choked in this backyard. Why did there not exist any signs that she had resisted? And her clothing was undisturbed, and she appeared to have just gone outdoors, but never to return. The investigators started by asking Adrian. He sat in the kitchen, staring off into space, apparently incapable of comprehending what had occurred. His responses were succinct, and Detective Miller saw that he stayed away from, "You say you discovered her this by making eye contact." Adrian said, "Yes," when she inquired in the morning. "I simply stepped outside without glancing up into, I don't know, I saw her in the yard. Where have you been and what happened?" Miller persisted in attempting to maintain. Adrian's tone was stern but compassionate, paused before responding. I was at once the children had gone to bed. I went home. I went to my room, slept off, and then woke up. This morning and ventured outdoors. The investigators meticulously recorded his assertion, but Miller was aware that this was merely she had first observed how individuals acted when they had anything to conceal. Maybe he was simply stunned by his wife's passing, but anything regarding his. When her behavior bothered her, the following action was to speak with their neighbors, astonished by the events, and disclose some of their observations, including late at night, hearing muffled sounds. But nobody had given it much thought, had observed anything questionable, making the investigation more difficult. But soon after the inquiry took and Miller discovered an intriguing turn, Alice recently told a friend about it, discussing family issues with her and implying that she had something awful found, that her buddy Marie consented to speak with the investigators and discuss what she. This was a shocking revelation, for the Alice informed me that she had conducted an inquiry and learned about Adrian's liaison with her. When Marie, the mother, met with the investigators visited her residence, she was she was heartbroken and unsure of what to do. Spoke only a few days ago. She said she didn't know and felt deceived. How to proceed once this revelation was altered? Miller was aware of all that they were now tackling a far more complicated circumstance than it had first appeared to be murder, treachery, and family drama. It depicted an unsettling image of the detectives started looking into Alice's emails and phone calls. This formed the subsequent crucial phase in the through their study. They found exchanges between Alice and her mom attesting to the communications regarding the romance with Adrian, were feeling guilty and afraid of being discovered. Alice's mother had begged her to not to demolish everything they had constructed. The investigators now had sufficient proof. Adrian Harris's reasons for being arrested. The fear of being revealed grew more apparent. The worry that all he owned might be lost. Detective Miller was well aware of the fact that violence frequently resulted from such circumstances. When someone in dire circumstances attempted to keep command of their lives in the near future, further proof surfaced. Traces discovered on Adriana's attire complemented those on he was unable to explain Alice's physique, and his alibi started to fall apart in the meanwhile. The mother of Claire Harris, Alice, was named when questioned, startled to learn about her daughter's death, but quickly identified. Miller observed that behind the grief's surface there was more to it. Hut mother who had lost her kid. Yet her apprehensive actions. When strange reasons were disclosed underlying tension, slowly the interrogation's pressure became unconscionable and CLA collapsed, acknowledged having an affair with Adrian, asserting that she attempted to stop the relationship. In her opinion, she had no understanding of Adrian's goals and was appalled by what had transpired as Adrian, Detective Jessica Miller, LED Harris entering the room for questioning her. She understood that strain made her heart stiffen, that the time of truth has come for everyone. The proof they had acquired over the Adrian was identified in the last several days as the principal suspect in the murder of Alice Harris. But Miller knew well enough that investigations frequently produced surprising turns, so she needed to be ready, for Adrian seemed worn out. Previously tidy look had become into unkempt, and his eyes that once radiating assurance were suddenly brimming with. When he sat down, he felt scared and confused. She saw Detective Miller across from her, how he struggled to control himself collectively, yet each gesture revealed the Adrian was going through internal anguish. Miller spoke in a familiar, calm tone. Your family had issues, and we being aware of Alice's affair, mother, and we now have proof that you were close to her on the night of her death, Adrian. His face twisted as he tightened his hands. I didn't want it to hurt and make me angry, he said, in this way, avoiding eye contact. Communication with Miller. The detective observed how anxiously his fingers banged on the table. Her objective was straightforward. She understood him enough to convince him to confess. That mental strain might rupture. She didn't want to hurry a slow pace with him. Thorough research was her strategy, and she planned to adhere to it. Adrian, she kept leaning to the very end. We are aware that you felt somewhat confined. Alice discovered the truth, and you were afraid of what may occur.